Hi, welcome everybody. This is week 6. This week we're going to be looking at rhetorical devices. So we're going to be looking closely at the psychological and related fallacies. We're going to be looking at fallacies also in week 7 and week 8. You've dogs. We're going to be recognizing and name fallacies that appeal directly to emotion, recognize the names of fallacies that they appeal to the psychological elements other than the emotions. Recently, we've watched the country's leaders and lawmakers slog through some pretty heavy rhetoric as they dealt with the healthcare reform of the financial system, and the midterm elections of federal and state officials. We've also heard some pretty good arguments and seen some pretty good evidence, mainly in the form of studies we believe were done with professional manner of trustworthy people, and that reforms are needed. But determining which information is good, something we, of course, must do to participate successfully in democracy, can be difficult amidst the clatter and the bang wearing. Political parties, adversarial media personalities, ranting, and sometimes unreliable misinformation from the blogosphere, and shouting in the streets. In fact, the emotional tone of public discussion and debate has lately reached the levels we haven't seen since the 1960s, and rhetoric often seems more gratuitously misleading now that it's done in those days. It may be that the authors were simply too young to recognize it back then, of course. As it becomes more difficult to find serious discussions of important issues, it gets easier and easier to find examples of rhetorical devices designed to provoke emotional knee-jerk reactions. Unfortunately for us as individuals, as well as for public policy, it can be altogether too easy to allow emotional response to take place of sound judgment and careful thinking. In this chapter, we'll target more specific devices designed to promote ill-considered reactions rather than sound judgment, devices that go beyond the rhetorical coloration we talked about in the last chapter. These tagrams will discuss sometimes masquerade as arguments, complete with premises and conclusions and language that would suggest argumentation. But while they may be made to look or sound like arguments, they don't provide legitimate grounds for accepting a conclusion. In place of good reasons for a conclusion, most of the schemes we'll look at in the chapter offer us considerations that are emotional or psychologically linked to the issue in my question. The support may appear to offer only pretended support, and you may think of them as pieces of pretend reasoning or pseudo reasoning. Devices in this chapter thus count as fallacies. A fallacy is a mistake of reasoning. The rhetoric devices were discussed last chapter, euphemisms, innuendo, and so forth, aren't fallacies. Of course, we commit a fallacy if we think a claim can be supported when support is nothing more rhetorically than persuasive language. People constantly accept fallacies as legitimate arguments, but the reverse mistake can also happen. We must be careful not to dismiss legitimate arguments as fallacies just because they remind us of a fallacy. Often, beginning students in logic have this problem. They read about fallacies like the ones we cover here, and they think about them everywhere. These fallacies are common, but they're not everywhere, and sometimes we must consider a specimen carefully before accepting or rejecting it. The exercises we'll supply will help you learn to do this because they contain a few reasonable arguments mixed with the fallacies. All fallacies in this chapter have common the fact that the pretends to be a premise is actually relevant to the conclusion. That is, even if the premise is true, it does not provide any reason for believing that the conclusion is true. Fallacies that involve appeals to emotion. One can arrange fallacies into groups in a number of ways. Fallacies of relevance, of ambiguity, of presumption, or distraction, and so on. We've chosen this chapter to talk about the fallacies that involve appeals and emotion, followed by fallacies that depend on the part of the psychological impact that do not appeal directly to the emotion of one another. Intentionally, we don't want to give the idea that all appeals of the emotion are fallacious, misleading, or bad in some other way. Often we accomplish our greatest goals works as a result of the appeals. One burden of the next section is to help you distinguish between a relevant and irrelevant call to our emotions. The argument from outrage. A while back in an article with the Washington Post by C.C. Connolly summarized a New England Journal of Medicine report that gave credit to a new medical technology of lowered battlefield deaths rates in the wars of Iraq and Afghanistan. Many fewer casualties were dying than ever before in the case of the wartime before. The most widely heard radio talk in America. Rush Limbaugh. He made the report to express his outrage at the liberal critics of the war. They were just livid. The press, leftists in the country, they're all upset here, not enough deaths, people outraged, protesting on the street against the war. They're mad these dictators are saving lives. They want death. So he's very popular, Rush Limbaugh. He passed away, but he had his own blog. He had his own podcast. He even had his own e-journal and like hard copy newsletter. I remember when I was a student, he would have representatives come to the school and walk around during our breaks and ask if we wanted to buy the newsletter. He also would say things like, the left wanted soldiers to die. This technique is expressing outrage. Anybody who doesn't see this point must be a fool or a traitor. He used those kind of words. Okay, let's look at some notes. Here's an overview of what we're going to be learning about. Deductive reasoning. We're going to look at formats, mapping, conventional casting, valid syllogism, deductive validity, invalidity, testing for validity, categorical logic, statements to forms, square of opposition, syllogisms, figure and mood, and Venn diagrams. Here's some mapping. Here is an example. All Americans are immortal. All humans are mortal. All Americans are humans. All humans are mortal. All Americans are humans. All Americans are mortal. 1, 2, 3. Americans are mortal. Oops. Okay, and then here's an example of Venn diagram. Sorry that my computer keeps freezing. All mysteries are suspenseful, and some books are not mysteries, and some books are not suspenseful, and this is valid or invalid. And back to our book. We have argument and outrage. They consist of inflammatory words or thoughts followed by a conclusion of some sort. It substitutes anger for reason and judgment and considering the issue. Its favorite strategy for demanding. Here's wishful thinking. Armani code. I had a pair of Armani glasses. They're pretty expensive. What happened to them? Usually my glasses get broken. Wishful thinking. Fashion magazines are chock full of ads that are designed to associate a product with beautiful images, as discussed in chapter 4. But even when using a product, one might make you smell like a guy in the photo. It isn't likely to change anything else. To believe otherwise is engage a wishful thinking discussed later in the chapter. Potential grounds versus rational grounds. A scary or threatening situation can provide with crucial reason for acting on a claim, even though outside immediate circumstances we would not expect it. For example, a person or organization might agree to pay a settlement to a person who claims to be the back of the injured of the property, even if they believe with good reason that he's faking the injury. Fear of losing or even a bigger sum in court provides prudential grounds for paying, even though it would never accept a claim that would pay, except for threatening circumstances. Scare tactics, trying to scare people into doing something or accepting a position is using scare tactics. One way would be done is the George Wallace method. Dangling a frightening picture in front of somebody. A simpler method might be to threaten the person. A special case scare tactics is known as argument by force. Either way, if the idea is to get people to substitute a fear for reason and judgment, then taking a position of the issue could be a fallacy. Fear can befuddle us to easily in anger, and mistakes that happen are both in both circumstances. Wallace listeners may not have noticed or may have not have cared that Wallace didn't actually give any evidence for civil rights workers. They were doing whatever was portrayed to them as doing. Portrayal was its own evidence, you might say. When we're befuddled with fear, we may not notice we lack evidence. That's a scary scenario that's real. Imagine someone talking about global warming. The speaker may paint a picture of alarming. We don't notice that he or she doesn't provide evidence that global warming is actually happening. Or take gay marriages. Somebody might warn us of presumptuously dire consequences of gay people allowed to marry. We'll be opening Pandora's box. Marriage will become meaningless. Homosexuality will be rampant. Society will collapse, and he or she may have the issue warnings without providing details of why or how the consequences might actually come about. Consequences are so frightening that they apparently don't need proof. Okay, so those are some examples of using fear. Okay, let's hope that my PowerPoint, this one works well. Critical thinking, more rhetorical devices. Let's review these rhetorical devices and related devices. A good argument provides justification for accepting the conclusion. Some rhetorical devices can be made to look like arguments containing premises and conclusions, but they don't really provide legitimate proof of what they were supposedly proving. This is called pseudo-reasoning. The argument from outrage. A fallacy is a mistake in reasoning. It's a mistake to think that something is wrong simply because it makes us angry. The argument from outrage. The argument from outrage consists of inflammatory words or thoughts followed by a conclusion of some sort. It substitutes anger for reason and judgment in considering an issue. The argument from outrage. Scapegoating is a breed of argument from outrage which one person or group gets blamed for everything bad. Example, dear editors, when Al Jones wrote to criticize city workers, he didn't mention his occupation. Maybe he's a millionaire with a care for the world, and he has time to criticize people working for him, even if he's a taxpayer. Scare tactics. When emotion appealed is to fear rather than anger, this is a fallacy known as scare tactic, a rhetorical device that uses a threat instead of good reasons to get somebody to accept the claim. Scare tactics. In a special case of scare tactics, the argument by force amounts to saying, agree with me or I'll hurt you. Scare tactics. Legitimate warnings are not scare tactics, even though they may be scary. If you don't check your parachute before jumping, you may die. That's an excellent argument. Scare tactics. You bet I'll explain why Fantasyland, an adult bookstore, should be closed down. You go there and you'll send your license plate number to the newspaper. Are you going to like people knowing what kind of stuff you read? Argument from pity. Argument from pity. You need a job, and although you're not qualified, you try to get it by making your employer feel bad for you. The name of the rhetorical device that plays on your compassion to accept a claim instead of relying on sound reasons. Argument from pity. Example, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my client stands before you accused of 3 bank robberies, but the prosecution has not told you about the 3 little children in the story who will have a hard time getting food on their table if their daddy goes to prison. Apple polishing fallacy. The apple polishing fallacy is when we allow praise of ourselves to substitute for judgment about the truth of a claim, or when we do this to others. Apple polishing fallacy. Officer, excuse me, sir. Do you know how fast you were going? Driver says, I never get over the sight of you, mounted policeman. How do you leap down off a horse's back so fast? And you must have them well trained not to run away when you dismount. Wishful thinking fallacy. Wishful thinking. Happiness when we accept or reject a claim simply because it would be pleasant or unpleasant if it were true. Wishful thinking fallacy. Example, there must be life on the other planets. Imagine how lonely we'll find the universe if we discover that we're the only ones here. Peer pressure argument plays on our desire for acceptance and our fear of rejection. It's the name of the rhetorical device that argues for a course of action on the grounds that taking this course will win the approval of others and especially one's friends. Example, are you telling me that you're 21 years old and still a virgin? I'll keep quiet about it if I were you. You'd be laughing stock at the dorm if they knew widely known. Now I have to tell you, if you're 21-year-old virgin, then you're probably STD free. Groupthink fallacy. Groupthink fallacy occurs when someone lets identification with the group take place of reasoning and deliberation when arriving at position in an issue. Groupthink fallacy. Example, my country right or wrong? Example, Python is where it's at the Alpha Kappa's read him. Fallacies based on emotions. Remember when arguments evoke emotions that make us want to accept the conclusion without support? Look to fallacies and rhetoric. Rationalizing. Rationalizing when we use false pretexts to satisfy our own desires or interests. Rationalizing involves the confusion and thinking. It involves the element of self-deception about our true motivation. Rationalizing. Example, she'll be glad I spent the night out drinking. I'm giving her some personal space. Argument from popularity. Argument from popularity is when we accept the conclusion of an argument because a lot of people have accepted the same conclusion. The name of the rhetorical device that encourages the acceptance of a claim on the grounds that's already accepted by others by a substantial number of others. Argument from popularity. Example, there must be an afterlife. Wherever you find human beings, you find their minds naturally returning to this thought. Example, obviously it was right for the United States to attack Iraq in 1991. Polls at the same time show that 90% of Americans thought the war was justified. Argument from popularity. Example, my opponent would like to see the TV networks label their programming on the grounds that violent shows make children watch them violent. But everyone knows a couple of shows can't change your personality. Common practice fallacy. The name of a rhetorical device that tries to justify an action on the grounds it's normal behavior, accepted by all or most people. Example, why do you take the bus to work when most people drive? Relativism. Reviewing chapter 1, truth is relative, opinions are relative, but not factual claims. Remember, factual claims can be tested or verified. Subjectivist fallacy. The name of a rhetorical device that's based on the view is called relativism. That's what's true as one is not due to another. Subjectivist fallacy. Example, professor, I gave you a D on your essay because your grammar was faulty and your organization was difficult to follow. Student says, that's just your opinion. Subjectivist fallacy. Example, biker. I refuse to buy a Japanese motorcycle. I don't believe in doing business with communist countries. Reporter. But Japan isn't communist. Biker. Well, to me, they are. Two wrongs make a right. Two wrongs make a right is a fallacy because wrongful behavior on someone else's part doesn't convert wrongful behavior on your own part into rightful behavior. Example. Two wrongs make a right. Example, well, finally, after all these years, the telephone company makes an error on my bill in my favor. And I'm surely not going to point it out to them. They've been gouging me since the telephone first came into existence. Red herring. A red herring fallacy is caused when a person brings a topic into conversation that distracts from the original point, especially if the new topic is introduced in order to distract. Red herring. Example. It's clear enough to me that Senator John McCain would have made a great president. Look, it isn't often that we get a chance to elect a guy who's a war hero. A prisoner of war is an enemy prison camp, and we ought to have it done when we had the chance. Smokescreen. Basically the same as a red herring. A smokescreen is when you pile up so many issues, the original issue gets lost. The name of the rhetorical device that tries to sidetrack somebody by bringing up the related is a relevant topic. Smokescreen. Here's an example of smokescreen. To the people who brought you the Great American Smokeout, we make the Great American Challenge. We challenge the American Cancer Society to clean up the air in its smoke-free offices. We're willing to bet there isn't much cigarette smoke at American Cancer Society offices. But according to a recent study of the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, cigarette smoke also wasn't a problem. 98% of the 2003 building reported to have indoor air problems. Indoor air inspections resulting from worker complaints typically find viruses, fungal spores, bacteria, gases, closed fresh air ducts, and ventilation systems in need of maintenance. Full page ad of the USA Today, sponsored by Tobacco Institute. A real literal smokescreen. The Tobacco Institute is playing off reports of dangerous office environments, but the ad is meant to divert attention away from the even greater dangers of cigarette smoking. The ad also hints that those who felt ill in the office should be to blame the smoker, but the smoke out was directed to actual smokers. Identify instances of pseudo-reasoning in following passages. Listen, Higgins, I need your voice at the next department election, or I may not get elected chair. Remember, if I get elected, it will be me who decides what hours your classes meet next year. That is scare tactics. When several people at Harvey's department got new computers, he was annoyed because it's not among them. I'll tell you what, Harvey says to his wife. If they want to rip me off by getting a new computer, not getting a new computer for me, I'll rip them off by taking extra office supplies. They've got a lot of stuff at work we can use around here, and I'll have no way of knowing that it's gone. Turnabout's fair play. That's two wrongs. You saw the former governor of Illinois did. He declared a moratorium on executions in the state. It was a good thing, too, because it turns out the large number of inmates on death row had turned loose because DNA evidence proved them innocent beyond a shadow of a doubt. It's about time that we got serious about the fact we've been convicting innocent people and sentencing them to death. No fallacy, I think it's about time, too. No, I do not believe a murderer has a right to live, and here's why. The criminal justice system in this country has gotten completely out of control. With what rapists, murderers, you name it, all getting off scot-free. That's got to change. Red herring. Those 4 officers who killed an innocent man in New York by mistake should be found guilty of any crime. None of them had ever been in any kind of danger, trouble before. And tragically, this kind of thing is going to happen when we have aggressive police work. Red herring. In fact, 2 red herrings. Gays in the military? No way. Clinton promoted the idea just to get a homosexual vote. Red herring. Gays in the military? Yes, there's no valid grounds for opposing the measure, as it's seen in the fact that policies of non-discrimination to gays are common practices throughout Western democracies. Common practice. From prosecutor's closing statement at the trial. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there is absolutely no doubt that the defendant committed these terrible murders. Look at the mother of the victim sitting over there, and the father. Their lives are forever destroyed by this evil deed. Never again will they know peace and happiness that was their due. Put yourselves in their shoes, and you would know whether this man is guilty. Red herring. Is the president guilty of sexual harassment as Republicans are yelping? Yeah, give me a break. What's important is jobs, healthcare, and welfare reform. Red herring. No, I don't believe Uncle Bob is really gone forever. He was like a father to me, and I believe that someday, somehow or another, we'll get to see one another again. I don't think I could go on if I didn't believe that. Wishful thinking. Listen, friends, it's our money that the Board of Supervisor wants to spend putting sewers and other improvements out there on Antelope Creek development. And you know who's going to profit from that the most? The developers, who don't even live around here. I tell you, we have sat back and done nothing long enough. It's high time we told these out-of-town interlopers that antelopers or whatever they are to mess with somebody else's town. I won't stand for it anymore. Argument from outrage. There's relevant appeal here, but the speaker is clearly trying to evoke outrage from his audience as well. I'll tell you why $100 is enough child support. You go to court and you ask for more, and you'll have my lawyer file a countersuit that will set you back a bundle of legal fees. Your tactics. I know it was not very nice to overcharge them like that for the room, but it's fair in love and war and business, my dear. Besides, if the situation was reversed and we were desperate for lodging, it would have bled us all the worse. Two wrongs make a right. George, I speak for the rest of the neighbors on our street. Frankly, your front yard is a mess. We'd appreciate if you would do something about it. We put the time and money into making our places look nice, but the effort is largely ruined by one awful looking place right in the middle of the block. We hope you'll do something about it. Ah, I might look like peer pressure or common practice, but I don't believe it's fallacy at all. Letter to the editor. Your food section frequently features recipes with veal. And you say veal is wholesome, nutritious dish. I disagree. You know how veal comes to your plate? At birth, a newborn calf is separated from the mother, placed in a dark enclosure and chained by the neck so they cannot move freely. This limits the muscular development so that the animal is tender. It's kept in a dark pen until the day it's cruelly slaughtered. Argument of pity. And there's no fallacy, what's the difference? The Adams store sells pianos. Pianos are the only business you'll get the best deal in the piano experts. What do you think it is? Red herring, they sell nothing but pianos, is relevant to how much they sell for them. Frankly, I don't think you would be satisfied with anything less than a Model 24, which allows for more expansion than any other personal computer in the class. The way you catch on to things, something I tell you just from the question you asked here in the store. You're not going to be happy with the machine whose limits you'll soon reach. Apple polishing. Sure, driving after you've been drinking can get you into trouble with the law. But if you're careful, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. After all, everybody does it, right? Common practice. Getting on Senator Davis's case about the priority of some financial dealings strikes me as just plain carpeting. Davis made a considerable economic sacrifice when he left private industry and entered politics. The people of this district are lucky to have him there. Red herring. From the letter of the editor, they're wrong again. The doctors who say sun causes cancer. The four substances for life are water, food, air, and sun. Everybody knows the sun opens the pores of your skin to release poisons. It cannot cause cancer. Cancer is caused by the toxin man puts in the air, not by sunlight. Argument from popularity. Although I don't think the view is popular among many. Listen, as long as you're going to live here in my house and let your mother and me support you, you can rest assured that you're going to cooperate. And that goes for your opinions as well as your behavior. Scare tactics. Reference to the prisoner of war experience remains a red herring until it's at least indicated how relevant to performance as president. Look, can you argue about it all day? But I believe that Carmichael is the best person for the job. And I hope he gets it. That's my opinion, and as well as good as any other opinion. So we might as well change that subject. A version of subjectivism. One person may be as good as another, and one may have as much right as opinion as another, but not all opinions are created equal. Those with better reasons are better opinions. Codes do cause words. People have known that for centuries. That's a version of appeal to popularity. It says here that smoke from wood-burning stoves, no matter how airtight they're supposed to be, gets into your house. It's a health hazard. No way. We just spent close to $1,000 on a new stove. What you're reading can't be true. Wishful thinking. Greyhound reminds you that when you travel by car, you take chances, especially if you're traveling alone. Anything can happen. Dangerous thunderstorm, sound effect, thunder, engine trouble, sound of a car failing to start, blowouts, tire blowing out, car screeching to stop. Next time, upbeat music, don't take chances. It's time to go to Greyhound and leave the driving to us. This may look like scare tactics, but the points made irrelevant to claim that alternatives to the Greyhound may be safer. Of course, it doesn't follow Greyhound, it's best alternative. Marty, if we keep the way we are going, we'll destroy civilization on this planet. Tracy, that's so depressing. I think we need all well of things. Wishful thinking. Well, things didn't work out quite the way I wanted, but that's the way of life often is. She says, that's not my philosophy. Your dreams will come true when you want them to, but you really have to want them to. Wishful thinking. First speaker, think about it. A 7-day waiting period to buy a gun would give people a chance to cool off. It would also give police a chance to make background checks. Are 7 days that much of an inconvenience? Second speaker, I wouldn't talk that way around here, friend. Lots of people around here own guns and they don't take kindly to people who want to make them register their guns. Your tactics. All right, it's video time, friends. Yeah. Here's some fallacies. Oops. I don't want to do this. There we go.
Definitely notice. He'll come get us.
Meet Lucy. She was a math major in college and aced all her courses in probability and statistics. Which do you think is more likely? That Lucy is a portrait artist, or that Lucy is a portrait artist who also plays poker? In studies of similar questions, up to 80% of participants chose the equivalent of the second statement, that Lucy is a portrait artist who also plays poker. After all, nothing we know about Lucy suggests an affinity for art, but statistics and probability are useful in poker. And yet, this is the wrong answer. Look at the options again. How do we know the first statement is more likely to be true? Because it's a less specific version of the second statement. Saying that Lucy is a portrait artist doesn't make any claims about what else she might or might not do. But even though it's far easier to imagine her playing poker than making art based on the background information, the second statement is only true if she does both of these things. However counterintuitive it seems to imagine Lucy as an artist, the second scenario adds another condition on top of that, making it less likely. For any possible set of events, the likelihood of A occurring will always be greater than the likelihood of A and B both occurring. If we took a random sample of 1 million people who majored in math, the subset who are portrait artists might be relatively small. But it will necessarily be bigger than the subset who are portrait artists and play poker. Anyone who belongs to the second group will also belong to the first, but not vice versa. The more conditions there are, the less likely an event becomes. So why do statements with more conditions sometimes seem more believable? This is a phenomenon known as the conjunction fallacy. When we're asked to make quick decisions, we tend to look for shortcuts. In this case, we look for what seems plausible rather than what is statistically most probable. On its own, Lucy being an artist doesn't match the expectations formed by the preceding information. The additional detail about her playing poker gives us a narrative that resonates with our intuitions. It makes it seem more plausible. And we choose the option that seems more representative of the overall picture, regardless of its actual probability. This effect has been observed across multiple studies, including ones with participants who understood statistics well, from students betting on sequences of dice rolls to foreign policy experts predicting the likelihood of a diplomatic crisis. The conjunction fallacy isn't just a problem in hypothetical situations. Conspiracy theories and false news stories often rely on a version of the conjunction fallacy to seem credible. The more resonant details are added to an outlandish story, the more plausible it begins to seem. But ultimately, the likelihood a story is true can never be greater than the probability that its least likely component is true. Much of our society relies on majority vote and consensus, so it's natural to think that the more consensus, the better. But how much trust should we place in unanimous decisions? Check out this video on the paradox of unanimity.
This holiday season at PetSmart, buy 3 dog treats and get the 4th free. Plus, earn double the points on all holiday treats, toys, apparel, and more with PetSmart Treats Rewards.
Yes, I do anything for you.
PetSmart, anything for pets.
Please be a phone, please be a phone. Is it a phone?
Ooh, it smells like a catnip toy from Chewy.
That's not a phone.
Get a free $30 e-gift card at Chewy.
This is better than toilet paper.
Get great deals on gifts that deliver excitement at Chewy.
Humanity. It's a train wreck, but I can't look away. It's 1843, and a debate is raging among physicians about one of the most common killers of women, childbed fever. Childbed fever strikes within days of giving birth, killing more than 70% of those infected, and nobody knows what causes it. Obstetrician Charles Meigs has a theory. Having observed abdominal inflammation in patients who go on to develop the fever, he claims this inflammation is the cause of childbed fever. Much of the medical establishment supports his theory. Oh, come on. They really leave me no choice but to teach them some skepticism. That's better. Now, Meigs, your argument is based on a fallacy, the false cause fallacy. Correlation does not imply causation. When two phenomena regularly occur together, one does not necessarily cause the other. So you say women who have inflammation also come down with childbed fever. Therefore, the inflammation caused the fever. But that's not necessarily true. Yes, the inflammation comes first, then the fever, so it seems like the inflammation causes the fever. But by that logic, since babies usually grow hair before teeth, hair growth must cause tooth growth. And we all know that's not true, right? Actually, don't answer that. A couple of different things could be going on here. First, it's possible that fever and inflammation are correlated purely by coincidence. Or there could be a causal relationship that's the opposite of what you think. The fever causes the inflammation rather than the inflammation causing the fever. Or both could share a common underlying cause you haven't thought of. If I may, just what do you think causes inflammation? Nothing? It just is. Really? Humor me for a moment in discussing one of your colleagues' ideas, Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes. I know you don't like his theory. You already wrote a scathing letter about it. But let's fill your students in, shall we? Holmes noticed a pattern. When a patient dies of childbed fever, a doctor performs an autopsy. If the doctor then treats a new patient, that patient often comes down with the fever. Based on this correlation between autopsies of fever victims and new fever patients, he proposes a possible cause. Since there's no evidence that the autopsy causes the fever beyond this correlation, he doesn't jump to the conclusion that autopsy causes fever. Instead, he suggests that doctors are infecting their patients via an invisible contaminant on their hands and surgical instruments. This idea outrages most doctors who see themselves as infallible, like Meigs here, who refuses to consider the possibility that he's playing a role in his patient's plight. His flawed argument doesn't leave any path forward for further investigation, but Holmes's does. It's 1847, and physician Ignaz Semmelweis has reduced the number of childbed fever deaths in a clinic from 12% to 1% by requiring all medical personnel to disinfect their hands after autopsies and between patient examinations. With this initiative, he has proven the contagious nature of childbed fever. Ha! It's 1879, and Louis Pasteur has identified the contaminant responsible for many cases of childbed fever, hemolytic streptococcus bacteria. My fries are cold. Must be because my ice cream melted. So, do you think you can do my job? Let's find out, shall we? Click here to see if you can outsmart this fallacy.
A performance that truly matters. For each and every one of us. This is what you've been waiting for. Get tickets now at shenyun.com.
We're here celebrating my birthday.
We're having our 56th anniversary.
Gave this to me as one of my Christmas presents.
Mother-daughter night.
And it was so sweet and beautiful and funny. Oh my gosh, it was a riot. I didn't expect to laugh so much.
The storytelling was phenomenal. It was really kind of interesting for the kiddos to get to see that multi-dimensional experience.
I think everybody really had a great time and a great thing to bring my family to.
It's not just a show about dance. It's a show about life.
I just absolutely love it. Get yourself a ticket.
Don't miss it.
It's for all people and everyone needs to see it. Absolutely everyone.
Half of my monthly premium is covered with financial help, and knowing I'm covered to go to therapy and fill my prescriptions is huge.
All plans cover doctor visits, prescriptions, emergency care, and more. Healthcare.gov is here for you. Enroll by December 15th.
Ah, a witch hunt. Humans are tireless in their pursuit of reason. It's 1950. Following threats from the communist governments of the Soviet Union and China, anti-communist sentiment in the United States is at an all-time high. Senator Joseph McCarthy claims he has a list of 205 communists in the U.S. who are influencing government policy. Didn't I just change the channel? Ah, I see. It's a different witch hunt. The Senate forms a committee to investigate McCarthy's claims. McCarthy names his first case against prominent lawyer, judge, and activist Dorothy Kenyon.
He accuses her of membership to 28 organizations that are communist fronts. Newspapers around the country rush to her defense, pointing out her vocally anti-communist record. The Senate committee schedules a hearing anyway, and she has just 5 days to prepare.
This is too much. If the government won't be a voice of reason, I'll have to. That's better. I'm surprised you good legislators have agreed to move this hearing forward. You're falling prey to a type of argument from ignorance, assuming that a claim is true because it hasn't been proven false. The claim being Senator McCarthy's accusations against Judge Kenyon, for which he provided no legitimate evidence. Is that right? I thought so. Some of the so-called communist organizations he accused her of joining don't even exist. To assume a claim is true because it hasn't been proven false ignores many other possibilities. That it hasn't been proven false yet, that it can't be proven true or false, or that it isn't completely true or completely false, to name a few. This leads to a handy rule of thumb. The burden of proof lies with the person making the claim. In other words, you make the claim, you supply the proof. If someone told you aliens exist, would you head off to find proof that they don't exist? Of course not. You tell that person to show you the UFO. The same applies when someone makes a claim that contradicts an established consensus. So when all the available evidence suggests that humans are causing an increase in global temperatures, the burden of proof has been fulfilled. If you disagree, it becomes your responsibility to prove otherwise. Right? I've gotten ahead of myself. You'll see what I mean soon enough. Anyway, your legal system supposedly recognizes this rule. So what are you all doing here?
It's July 17th, 1950, and the Senate subcommittee has officially dismissed all charges against Kenyon.
As they should.
It's 1954, and the Senate has formally disciplined McCarthy.
Took them long enough.
He will serve out the rest of his term, but will never again be elected to a public office. Because of his widespread anti-communist influence, hundreds of people have been incarcerated, and thousands have lost their jobs.
Look what the communists did. Feeling smart, are we? All right. Let's see if you can outsmart the fallacy that fooled a generation of doctors with this video.
Tourists. Tourists that turn into scientists. Tourists taking photos that are analyzed by AI. So researchers can help life underwater flourish.
Baking apple pie? Discount Orange Warehouse has you covered. A fruit's a fruit, right?
It's 1988, and scientist James Hansen has just testified to the United States Congress that global warming trends are caused by human activity and will pose an increasing threat to humanity in the future.
Well. That's unusually prescient for a human.
Looking for a wedding dress? Try a new take on a timeless classic. It's sleek, flattering, and modest, just like the traditional dress.
Commercials. Could anything be more insufferable?
It's 1997, and the United States Senate has called a hearing about global warming. Some expert witnesses point out that past periods in Earth's history were warmer than the 20th century. Because such variations existed long before humans, the witnesses claim the current warming trend is also the result of natural variation.
There is something more insufferable than a commercial. Luckily for the humans, there's one more expert witness. What are you looking at? We're all dressed. At least we are by the logic you just used. It's as if you were to say apples and oranges are both fruits, therefore they taste the same. Or that underwear, wedding dresses, and suits are all clothes, therefore they're all equally appropriate attire for a Senate hearing. The European wars of the 19th century and World War I were all wars, right?
Mm-hmm.
So World War I couldn't be any more devastating than those other wars, could it? Let's say two people have a fever. They must have the same disease that's causing that fever, right? Of course not. One fever could be caused by chicken pox, the other by influenza, or any number of other infections. Like your claim about rising global temperatures, these claims make a false analogy. You're assuming that because two phenomena share a characteristic, in this case, warming, they are analogous in other ways, like the cause of that warming. But there's no evidence that that's the case. Yes, there have been other warm periods in Earth's history. No one's disputing that the climate fluctuates. But let's take a closer look at some of those older examples of global warming, shall we? The Cretaceous hot greenhouse, 92 million years ago, was so warm forests covered Antarctica. Volcanic activity was likely responsible for boosting atmospheric carbon dioxide and creating a greenhouse effect. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, 55 million years ago, was so warm crocodiles swam the waters of the Arctic Circle. This warming may have been caused by the drying of inland seas and release of methane, a potent greenhouse gas from ocean sediments. Even among these other warm periods, you're making a false analogy. Yes, they had natural causes, but each had a different cause and involved a different amount and duration of warming. They're as dissimilar as they are similar. Taking them together, all we can reasonably conclude is that the Earth's climate seems to change in response to conditions on the planet. Today, human activity is a dominant force shaping conditions on your planet, so the possibility that it's driving global warming can't be dismissed out of hand. I'll grant that the more complicated something is, the easier it is to make a mistaken analogy. That's especially true because there are many different types of false analogy. That similar symptoms must share a cause, that similar actions must lead to similar consequences, and countless others. Most false analogies you'll come across are far less obvious than those comparing apples to oranges, and climate is notoriously complex. It requires careful, rigorous study and evidence collection, and making a false analogy like this only impedes that process.
It's 2013, and the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has found, aggregating decades of research, that there's more than a 95% chance the global warming trend since the mid-20th century has been driven by human activity, namely the burning of fossil fuels.
You're both pets, and he likes living in water. So you should too.
All right, we'll take a break from those for a moment and go back to our chapter work. There's other fallacies based on emotions. We watched that in the videos, and we also looked at that in the PowerPoints. Other emotions work much like anger or fear and sources of mistakes, reasoning. Compassion, for example, is a fine thing to have. There's absolutely nothing wrong with feeling sorry for someone. And feeling sorry for somebody drives a position on an unrelated matter. As a result, the fallacy is known as argument from pity. Here's fake surgery work just as well as the cases of osteoarthritis. So as we know, sometimes people believe in placebo effects. Maybe they are taking something that you may not agree with, but they get better. And then sometimes people have surgery hoping that'll make them better. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. It says we are doing surgery on people and it's all a sham. And Dr. Bosch Brody from Baylor College of Medicine said that wishful thinking, allowing our desires and hopes to color our beliefs and influence our judgment, is common indeed. A powerful illusion of wishful thinking is placebo effect, where subjects perceive improvement in a medical condition, where they receive what they think is medication, when in fact it's inactive substance. Even surgical procedures apparently are subject to placebo effect. Judging from the study of a popular and expensive knee operation for arthritis, people have had procedures to where it significantly reduces pain. But researchers at the Houston Veterans Affairs Medical Center and Baylor College of Medicine discovered that subjects who underwent the placebo fake surgery said exactly the same thing. Furthermore, when they tested knee functions 2 years after the surgery, the researchers discovered the operation didn't improve knee functions at all. And envy and jealousy can confuse our thinking. Compassion and desirable emotion may tempt us to emphasize a person's good points. Envy and jealousy tempt us to exaggerate somebody's bad points. When we find fault with a person because of envy, we are guilty of the fallacy known as argument from envy. Well, he may have a lot of money, but he certainly has had bad manners. Would be an example of this in the envy he promotes us to criticize. We talked about apple polishing, so pride, on the other hand, leads us to exaggerate our own accomplishments, and abilities can lead to our making irrelevant judges. Well, it specifically makes us vulnerable to apple polishing, by which we mean the old-fashioned flattery. We have guilt trip, explicit feelings of guilt to others to do or to do something, to accept the view that they should or should not do it. Is popularity is putting a guilt trip on somebody, which they commit a fallacy. Hopes, desire, and aversions can lead us astray logically. The fallacy known as wishful thinking happens when we accept a surge of acceptance or rejection of a claim simply because it would be pleasant or unpleasant if it was true. When we do this, we try to get somebody else to do it. The fallacy of peer pressure is the argument. We have, let's define a groupthink fallacy, substituting pride for membership in a group of reason, and deliberation is arriving at a position of the issue, and include the fallacy in the list of the top 10 fallacies involving national pride or nationalism, a powerful and fierce emotion that can lead to blind endorsement. You also have some non-emotional based fallacies in the videos, and also in the PowerPoint. It mentions the red herring, appeals to popularity and tradition and such. Rationalizing all have psychological elements, but they do not take the same kind of direct emotional appeal that we find in preceding fallacies. Red herring is smokescreen. The person said to have introduced the red herring is also because a dragging that red herring across a trail will cause a dog to leave the original trail and to follow. The true for cop-out, sometimes, especially when a controversial subject is under discussion, you will hear somebody say, well, that may be true for you, but it isn't true for me. If you stop to think about it, there's a particular thing to say. Certainly the issue is about an object of fact, whether there is water in the moon, for example, is true of anybody, true of everybody. And somebody recently said, you can choose your own opinions, but you cannot choose your own facts. And facts are just what they are, and they're the same for everybody. Of course, one person can believe something is true while another believes it isn't true, but that's a different matter entirely. If that's what the speaker means, he should simply say clearly instead of using a paradoxical version we're calling cop-out. When we say the expression's a cop-out, we mean simply the way of saying I don't want to talk about it anymore. It's a discussion ender, and certainly does not anything resolve whatsoever the original issue was. We see the expression and used most often, perhaps in a matter of religion, where people hold back feelings, but for one reason or another, they do not want to engage the discussions about them. The only place where the true form expression is not a cop-out when the claim questions is subjective. For example, Zinfandel tastes better than Marilot. This remark can make it true for a person and false for another because they really have two different tastes. Remember, whatever you hear is true for it. Expression is objective, factual matter. It's just a way of saying I'm done talking. Red herring is a letter of time. Time's coverage of medical marijuana controversy was thoughtful and scrupulously researched. But what argues most persuasively is the ban on marijuana is extraordinary threat of the drug possesses adolescents. Marijuana impairs short-term memory, depletes energy, and impedes acquisition of psychological skills. Perhaps the most chilling effect that it retards maturation in young people. Significant number of kids who use the kinds of pot simply don't grow up. It is hardly surprising that marijuana is a primary drug. More than half the youngsters in the long-term residential substance programs that Phoenix House operates throughout the country. This issue is legalizing marijuana for adults and the question of what would be to do children who presumptuously would be prohibited from the use of a red herring. The difference between red herrings and their close relatives, smoke screens, is subtle. Really not a matter of crucial importance. Generally speaking, red herrings distract by pulling one's attention away from the topic and toward another. Smoke screens tend to pile issues on or make them extremely complicated until original is lost in the verbal smoke. Sometimes a red herring or smoke screen involves the appeal to emotion, but often does not. When Bill Clinton had missiles fired at terrorists in Sudan, he was accused of creating a red herring to deflect public scrutiny from Monica Lewinsky's business. When George W. Bush talked about Iraq having missiles capable of threatening the United States, about the country's potential of having a nuclear weapon within 6 months, and about similar possible Iraq threats, he was accused of putting up smokescreen to hide his real reasons for wanting to attack Iraq, which is said to be oil interests and his own personal desire to complete his unfinished business. We could have a conversation like this. Mr. Calderon, polls say that the most country believes governments fail to make situations safer. How would you answer critics? Felipe Calderon says we're making progress and reassuring people, and quite frankly, our efforts have been hampered to the tendency of the press to concentrate negative side of the issue. Okay, when we talked the other week, we looked at chapter 5 and examined proof. Everyone knows, and it's common sense that phrases like this are often used when a speaker and a writer doesn't really have an argument. Is it still alive if everybody does it? Well, here's an example here. Shell Oil Company was charged with misleading advertising in the platform advertisement. A Shell spoken says the same commitment can be made about most good advertising products. A perfect example of a common practice fallacy. We have appeal to popularity. When we do this, we urge somebody to accept the claim or fall prey to somebody's doing it, simply on the grounds that most or the substantial number of people known as authorities or experts, of course, believe we commit the fallacy known as appeal to popularity. That most people believe something is a fact is evidence that it is a fact. Most people believe in God, and that wouldn't be evidence that God didn't exist. Most people seem to assume that bus driving and similar jobs are somehow less desirable than white-collar jobs. The widespread acceptance of this assumption creates its own momentum. That is, we tend to accept it because everybody else does, and we don't stop to think about whether it actually has anything to recommend. For a lot of people, a job driving a bus might make a much happier life than a job as a manager. You have appeal to common practice. It consists of trying to justify or defend an action or practice as distinguished from assertion or claim on the grounds of common. We also have appeal of tradition. Another variant of popularity fallacy is appeal of tradition, a name of self-explanatory. When we do this, we use false pretexts to satisfy our own desires or interests. We're guilty of rationalizing, a very common fallacy. Then we have two wrongs make a right. We talked about that. From a reasoning standpoint, you're committing a fallacy known as two rights make a right. Wrongs make a right. Oh, just a review. Fallacies appeal to motion. Some of those were argument of outrage, scare tactics, argument by force, argument from pity, argument from envy, apple polishing, guilt trip, wishful thinking, peer pressure argument, groupthink fallacy, and nationalism. Other fallacies discussed in this chapter don't involve emotions directly, but closely related to emotional appeals. These include red herring, smokescreen, appeal to popularity, appeal to common practice, appeal to tradition, rationalization, two wrongs make a right. All right. So just want to go over your assignment before you go. We're on week 6. So this week we were looking at different stages of critical thinking and development. We're looking at different parts of critical thinking. We're looking at some of the fallacies. I want you to answer one of these questions in your discussion this week. You can either do question 1 or question 2. Discussion question 1 is describe a time that you resolved a complex problem. Share a specific example of a complex problem that you faced at work. Or 2, how did you handle a conflict with a coworker? Discuss a time where you had a disagreement with a coworker. What did you do to resolve this? Did you just put up with it? Did you talk it out, communicate? Remember, your DQ should be 200 to 300 words, and your initial response should be done this week. And then your assignment is to do feedback. Review faculty feedback and write a 100 to 200 word paper response explaining how you will address any corrections or additions to your assignment. And I want you to continue conducting research to add to your project. All right, remember, if you have any questions, you can always contact me. If not, farewell and happy learning. Bye now.